Hello everyone, my name is Xingmeng Jiang and I'm going to represent my group for presenting the EC1B3 projects. So, about critically analyze the journal Why is Productivity Slowing Down? So my presentation will be followed throughout this order. First, I will provide some brief introduction to the topic, then I will present the factors causing the productivity slowing down, and obviously to provide some comprehensive analysis towards some major factors. Then I will establish a clear connection with the models that we've learned in EC1B3. Last but not least, I'll provide some evaluation to the arguments included in this journal. So why this topic is important? Because though we could say the GDP per capita did experience rising in United States, Germany, United Kingdom, France, and Japan in 1997 to 2017, what we should never forget is there is a slowdown in productivity growth. For instance, in United States, this figure though is only 1.61. This led to missing GDP per capita of 12,000, which is a large figure, and we should certainly to explore the factors that induce this slowdown in productivity growth in order to potentially improve our GDP per capita performance in the future. So, according to the author's argument, what exactly caused productivity to slow down could be attributed primarily to the capital, which could be split into financial crisis, secular trends, which are both cyclical way and structural way. The capital here referring here is physical or tangible capital, but equally important is the TFP, the spillovers from intangible capital such as the research and development. Their slowdown could actually contributes a lot to the percentage of US slowdown in effective productivity. Another thing we should notice is that there exists a huge differences between different countries about the factors exactly cause the productivity to slow down. Like for instance, in the UK, the labor composition 0.39 is a huge percent, but in the US, this only accounts for 0.01. So, to sum up, the most important factors causing productivity to slow down in US is capital accumulation and investment slowdown, which could be split into three parts: cyclical aspect, structural, which is secular aspect, and intangible capital aspects. Another important factor mentioned by Arthur is allocative efficiency, which refers to more and more resources are actually given to the factories that had a clear or close connection with the government, but it tended to be old-fashioned and direct little capital into useful or into productive investments such as technological and innovation progress. And this allocative inefficiency in resources actually led to productivity slowdown. But I will not go into depth about this argument because the capital accumulation is actually the most important argument that I'll be focusing on. Other two minor points include trade, which are globalization, which the authors argue that an increase in globalization caused the productivity slow down, and also the labor composition, though the authors argue this is not a really important factor. So I will not consider going into depth about the two factors. So, the foreign capital accumulation and investment. The first part is cyclical, which could be regarded to economic downturn such as the financial crisis. It actually caused the foreign capital accumulation investment in three ways. The first way is during this type of economic downturn, there will be more credit constraint imposed by the financial institutions or the banks because the banks will be less willing to lend the money to those investors because of the high risks associated. This in turn made investors had less capital amounts to invest, which to invest in those kind of protective investments such as technological progress and machinery, which actually induced the productivity slowdown. The second aspect is because with lower expected aggregate demand in the economy will make investors preoccupied of whether investing into those machinery, into technological innovation would generate sufficient return or profits to balance the cost of investments, which actually disincentivize the investors to invest in those capital, in those machinery, technological progress in the economic downturn period. And the third aspect is regarding the lower government expenditure, and more specifically, lower government expenditure in infrastructure building. So, the lower Infrastructure building also means a higher transaction cost incurred by those investors, which actually increase the cost of protection by those investors, which reduce the disposable financial capital to invest for those investors, and consequently they will have less available money to invest in those physical capital such as machinery or factory. Another reason is of structural reason, which there was a decrease in competition, especially in the U.S. economy, which we could observe an increase in the formation of cartel and monopoly, which really reduced incentives for investors to innovate because of the less competitive pressure faced in the economy. The second aspect is growing short-termism for many kind of entrepreneurs, because they only focus on the stock prices and the current profitability instead of a long-term or sustainable profitability. So they tended to increasingly direct their capital resources into current spending such as marketing, advertising, instead of devoting them into the machinery building that would generate sustainable profit in the long run. The third reason of globalization, which authors argue increasing globalization reduced the capital accumulation and investment. But the problem is, all of those we mentioned above are physical capital and tangible capital. But where is intangible capital? The drop in intangible capital means a drop in the capital that contributed to the formation and improved efficiency of usage of physical capital. A great example is research and development, as well as managerial practices. But the key feature of intangible capital are non-excludable and non-rivalry, which on the one hand it means it could quickly spill over to the whole economy, but on the other hand it also means this free rider problem, which actually caused investors less willing to invest in those intangible capital. But given this scenario, especially given the US, there's really little property protection rights, especially intellectual property or innovation rights, protection rights, or laws. There is a reduction in intangible capital, which also means a worse use of the same input of resources. And this consequently means a dramatic reduction in A in the Solow model. The Solow model, according to this equation, A plays a significant role not only in the output, but also in the output per capita, which is the GDP per capita. What does this factor productivity slow down means is originally we will expect the AK alpha is at this higher level of kind of curve. But given the reduction in productivity, we would see the real AK alpha shift to the downward side. This consequently also reduced investment, because investment equals to S times Y, which means there will be a reduction in the equilibrium capital from K1 to K2. This means a reduction in the equilibrium and output per capita from Y1 to Y2, which means there will be a missing GDP per capita from Y1 to Y2, as illustrated by the authors. But is it really important? Is it okay if we only focus on capital investment? The answer is no. One deficiency of the journal argument is the labor composition according to the argument is not important at all. But according to the Roma model, it is important to identify the proportion of labor force that devoted into production of new ideas for the factor productivity to rise. But it was actually the young who produced the idea, not the aging population. So a more composition of younger population would actually cause an increase or improvement in factor productivity and would increase the economic output, which the authors failed to address. And another thing is basically there is intangible capital fall, but there is no clear reason why. The authors mentioned what causes capital fall, which is one of the disadvantages of this journal. Last but not least, why the authors start with different countries but ended with only US is another point that authors should tended to clarify and explain clearly about the differences existed between different countries instead of focusing only in the US points. And that's our references, and thank you very much for your listening. And yeah, that's it.